Hey all, we are back today in the AMR Material Handler project, and we have a whole bunch of new updates to share with you today regarding a comprehensive new dashboard that includes requirements from ISO 3691-4 as well as NCRA R1508, and a whole bunch of new features for highlighting recommendations by our AI assistant and supporting VDMA Sistema libraries in our Pascal editor. Great. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the dashboard to begin with. So we have a few new things here that you'll see. We have the SOLIS risk matrix and the recent activity. We still have the hazards, control measures, and safety functions you're used to. Let's start by looking at safety functions, and we'll come over to frameworks and compliance rate, and then go over to the items view. So the first thing you can see here is that for every one of these safety functions that we've defined, which are associated with particular control measures and hazards, we now have an achieved performance level and a residual risk level, both of which are ranked according to the risk levels of 13849. We can switch those out for R15306 as appropriate. And as you can see, we actually so we allow you to both set this using the dropdown in the editor, as well as by pulling it from the ultimate PL that's logged by the calculator right here. So that's the first thing. And you can see, for example, that if the residual risk is sufficiently low at the end, we mark the safety function as compliant. In fact, the real thing we intend to do here is compare the achieved PL to the original PLR of the associated hazards, which will be in place very soon. So that's great. Let's take a look at some of this new logic for the actual Pascal safety function architecture editor. So you can see that we now have some pills components here. Well, how do we get those? So the first thing you'll see is as you click into these, well, first thing, you can add as many of these as you like and loop them all together. So you can have a classical dual channels architecture. You could even have a dual channel architecture that has some weird dependencies and see some weird stuff going on there. But for every one of these, you now have the ability to select the component type. So we have the traditional component types, some of which are usable for any of our different block types, or you can upload at this time a VDMA file. So I downloaded Pills's full library, and as soon as I upload that, I click in and I can choose any of their components. So I don't know exactly the naming for their, I believe it's the PSN. I forget which exactly their safety controller is, but you can pull that in. And as soon as you do, we'll load their category, DC level, MTTFD level. And pretty soon we'll also show your PFH inline in the same view, just like you see in Pascal. So that's all great. Once you save that, you get those updated PL, so on. You'll see the reload, and you can all see that loaded back in the items that we'll look at in a minute. The compliance rate right here, we don't support clicking into that yet, but it is based on the compliant measure right here. So now the really exciting thing that we discussed is, what if you have some requirements that are emerging from this particular safety function that get overridden by your Type C standard? So we have a number of Type B and Type C standards that are sources of a variety of these different requirements that you can loop into right here, just like we used to with ISO 13482, the service robot standard. So in particular, you can click into 3691 and view any particular clause and then import those requirements. So for example, there are some general requirements here. And if, for example, the truck being equipped with a backup power source is something that you want to add to your project and override something else with, you can add that right here, and you can add some description. So you can say material handling AMR must have backup source for standard activities. And we can get that added. It takes just a sec. And we can go over to requirements and see that ourselves now. So you have all this highlighting that we'll come back and look at in just a sec, or we can go over to the last page, and you have right at the bottom ISO 3691 for clause 511, and you can relate this to all the other items that this might be related to as well. So for example, maybe some of the redundant safety control measures that we thought about before might actually be a derivative of this particular clause. So we can build that relation. So we can say, hey, this is related to this particular clause. And we're good to go. So now we can save that. It's highlighted in red for now, and we're good to go. Okay, as soon as that saves, I'm going to show one last interesting thing. So you can see, for example, here, actually, the reason this is taking a minute is because we're going in. So the very last thing to see is we saw back at the very end here that we updated this redundant safety control measure to be related to this clause from 3691. We can view all of that in the trace graph if we so desire. But we also mentioned that we had some changes to uh, the parent hazard for this particular control measure. Now, one interesting thing that we've thought about in the past is that this hazard update is going to be generated by AI. So we want to highlight that to the user. So it was this first hazard right at the top. And you can see that there were these new residual calculations that were performed that weren't here before. So let's get this added to this view so that we can see what those, that those need to be reviewed. So we have residual severity, we have residual probability of avoidance, we have residual risk level. And it looks like, unfortunately, those aren't highlighted right here. So let's see if the cell colors were updated. Okay, not quite there. Well, let's take a look at a better example, which is that, for example, we performed inference of the performance level for this particular control measure. And we did so using our infer field mechanism. We provided, hey, we want to calculate the performance level. We said A, B, C, D, E. I'm not going to run it right now, but as soon as that got logged, it got marked as yellow. And now the good thing is that if you want to mark this now as reviewed by a human or of concern, you can confirm that label, save the change, and now everyone else knows that, hey, I, as the reviewer, marked this one as good to go. Okay, those are some of our big changes now. You can see, again, this is rerunning the residual risk assessment on its parent hazard. And there we go. We just completed that. And we should see some updates right here for the parent hazard too. No, not quite, but all good things. All right. Hope that's a great view of some of our latest changes on the new dashboard, inclusion of all kinds of new requirements. We're off to the races. Thanks for being part of the ride.